The 18 Strong Podcast, episode 132 with Scott Shepard from Plane Performance.
Let's not say that the golf swing is really natural. Let's face it, you hinge forward, you hinge laterally, you rotate. And I think that's one of the reasons why people struggle with it is because it's not a natural movement to some people. You have to develop it via skilled training. You have to, so to speak, time under tension.
Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast, where you get direct access to the world's greatest experts on training harder, practicing smarter, and playing better golf. Now, here's your host, Jeff Pellizzero.
Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast. I'm Jeff Pellizzero, and this week we're talking to Scott Shepard from Plane Performance in Orlando, Florida, and we're discussing the topic of golfish-style workouts. And if you've listened to the show before, you know that the idea of making a workout golfy just for the sake of being golfy is not something that we're a huge fan of. And the idea of training golfers like athletes is much more the philosophy and style of what we've discussed and a lot of the theme of some of the guests that we've had on the show. But Scott Shepard takes a little bit of a different approach and actually thinks that there are times and places where the workouts need a little bit of that quote-unquote golfishness. And if you don't recognize that term, we talked about it in episode number 57 with Charlie Weingroff, who actually is the guy that coined the term golfish. And it has to do with, making an exercise look like a golf swing, mainly for the sake of just making it look like a golf swing. So the person doing it feels like they're doing something golf-related and doesn't necessarily always correlate to the greatest impact on their workout or their training level or what they need out of their program. But we have some great talking points with Scott today about ideas of when you need to bring in some of these kind of alternative exercises aside from your standard linear, pushes and pulls and squats and deadlifts and presses and things like that to make sure that your golfers are getting the best and most beneficial, most efficient workouts as possible. So I think this is a great discussion to have because there are so many coaches and strength coaches and trainers that are on one side of the spectrum or the other. Again, there's always some gray area in between. And so I thought it was a great conversation to open up some dialogue upon, and we can even continue the conversation over in the Facebook group and online after the episode if you have any more questions or input on this whole topic. One thing that we talk about that I really, really like the idea of is Scott mentions positional mobility and being able to really make sure that an athlete has the ability to perform a motion in whatever their athletic sport or movement is. So we talk about that. And then also how he works with his different levels of golfers and how it's very different, the training programs that he has with his professional players and higher level athletes, how different that is compared to, the more recreational style golfer or somebody that maybe isn't at as high of a level, either training wise or skill wise, in what he does differently. So I think that's a great conversation for you to pay attention to as well. Before we jump into the episode, let's go ahead and thank our sponsor, Rad Roller, for once again supporting the show, supporting this episode. And if you didn't listen to last week's episode, number 131, we had Kevin Hendry, who's the Director of Education for Rad Roller, on the show, and we discussed everything about soft tissue mobility and different techniques and ways to really improve your mobility, but also maintain that mobility through a specific set and step of actions, which included, first the myofascial release, then doing some sort of active mobility drill, and then doing some sort of stability drill to really kind of hone in and make sure that you're getting the benefits from that release and from those soft tissue massage tools that you're using. So if you haven't checked out the Rad Roller products, just go to radroller.com. They've got some of the greatest soft tissue and self-myofascial release products on the market. I use them almost every day with my clients. We use them here at the house. I even have my kids using them on occasion. They've just been such a great resource to add to my toolbox when working with clients. So if you want any more information on those, go to radroller.com. Of course, you can use the code 18STRONG, which will get you a discount on any of the products that they have on their website. All right, without further ado, let's jump into this golfish conversation with Scott Shepard. Scott Shepard, welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Glad to be here.
You got it, man. This is going to be an exciting episode. I know we've got some things to talk about that there's a little controversy around how people go about training their golfers and training as golfers themselves. And we've had conversations with many different trainers and coaches and therapists on the show about, different techniques. And so we're going to get into the whole golfish discussion and talk about some of those things. But let's give the audience a little background on, who you are, what your background in golf and fitness and physical therapy is, and, kind of the story of Scott Shepard.
All right. Sounds really good. Basically I've been a physical therapist for about 15 years now. So I started on the injury rehab side of everything. I'm in Orlando, Florida. So I got my first job out of college at kind of a sports medicine type orthopedic rehab center. We did a lot of work with Arena League football teams, WNBA, some of the things that we had contracts with at the time. A lot of injury management, stuff like that. And certainly there were a few golfers that kind of came in the doors being in Orlando. So I started out and I knew I always wanted to work with athletics. So that was a passion of mine growing up. I think a common theme with a lot of obviously the people you have on the show and who are involved in sports training and rehab is a love of athletics. So starting off, I played basketball, baseball, all the sports as a kid growing up the way they used to do it before we got all specialized. And now, I wanted to work with athletes when I got out of physical therapy school, and I kind of was looking around at what the options were. Where could I fit in and work with athletes? And you had like the Orlando Magic, you had all these basketball teams, all these football teams. They had their own staff, trainers traveling around with them, doing all kinds of stuff. I didn't really think that schedule was conducive to what I wanted to do with my life and my family life. So I kind of settled into a sports medicine center. And again, was just kind of looking around like, I really want to work with athletes. And it's kind of funny the way I say this, but at the time I was of this mindset, and it was like, well, I really want to work with athletes, but the only thing I really get to work with here is golfers, So, it's kind of a funny way of looking at it now, but I kind of worked for a company called Health South, and they at the time were the tour providers for services, medical, injury rehab on the tour, ran the trailers. So they had a program that they set up where they wanted local, kind of a liaison physical therapist contact for some of the guys when they get injured and they were in their off season. Could they come in and work with that person? And basically they wanted to train that person in golf. Now, I didn't grow up playing golf, so I didn't really know a whole lot about golf. But I wanted to work with athletes. So it was one of those situations where, passionate about working with athletes, not necessarily passionate about, golf per se, but it gave me a window of opportunity to work with athletes. And of course I know they're athletes now. And as I learned more about the sport, I learned about the physical requirements of the sport, and I learned about, some of the training that can be done. And of course, during that time period, you're talking like 2001 through, this is really before golf fitness was crazy. In a way, golfers almost became athletes, at least to the public. They became athletes, and people started perceiving them as athletes and seeing how they started training like athletes, which was a big difference between the past. So they really were athletes, and they kind of fell right into my lap being in Orlando. And so I got started. I went through this course with Health South. It was great. We learned about the body and how it relates to golf. It was very old school. I would say very isolational approach, looking at each joint, trying to determine range of motions, not really correlating a lot of it back to the golf swing, but kind of having a general overall statement of you need to stretch all these areas, you need to be mobile in these areas, and you need to have strength in here. There were a few parts of it that were kind of funny. Nothing against the guys who developed it because they were great. But later, you'll hear I work with Mike Bender, who's one of the top coaches in PGA professionals, working with Zach Johnson and lots of other professional golfers. And Mike and I would talk about it, and it's kind of funny because the funny thing about it was actually the screening questionnaire. And Mike mentioned to me, he goes, "Remember that questionnaire they put out?" He goes, "It's kind of funny." He goes, "They ask you questions like, hey, how far do you hit your 7-iron?" And then the follow-up question, they wanted you to fill in how far you hit your 7-iron. The follow-up question was, how far do you want to hit your 7-iron? And so we always used to get a kick out of that because it was like, Mike was like, he's like, "I'm pretty sure I wrote in like 300 yards. Like I want to hit that thing out there really far, And it was kind of like it was a marketing thing, and it was a little gimmicky, and it was like, wow, like, can they actually get me like whatever yardage I ask for? This is amazing.
Yeah, trying to bait him in to make him realize that this fitness thing might be up to something.
Yeah, exactly. So, that was way back when. And I kind of laugh at that now, starting back and looking back. And whenever I talk to guys who are working with golfers now, I think they should probably gain some perspective of, the groundwork that was laid by a lot of the guys. Obviously, like, TPI and Greg Rose and Dave Phillips were a huge part of that. There were other programs out there too that were developed. And, we had to go through those awkward phases where, people would ask you questions like, oh, golfers, they work out? Like, I didn't realize, why would a golfer work out? What's that all about? So we had to go through that phase. And I started this program, and Health South at the time was interested in it for the rehab standpoint, mostly for the insurance and the injuries. But what would happen is we'd get these guys going, and they would say, well, Scott, I'm doing better. What do I do the rest of the year? And, Health South at the time, I don't think was really super interested in, doing more like performance training. I was. And so I just started doing it on my own on the side. And it was a really slow growth process trying to get some PGA professionals at that time to actually listen to you, actually like sit down in a meeting with you and say, here's what I'm going to do. But I finally really latched on to this guy, Mike Bender, and he obviously is an amazing coach and just really an amazing person too. But he gave me an opportunity to work with his golfers, and that opened a lot of doors for me. I learned a ton at that time from him about the golf swing. And then I also, got introduced to the TPI program. I went through just the level 1 at that time, and never really went through any of the other levels, but continued to follow what they're doing and learn from those guys. And around that time, it really started to take off. So I was able to actually develop this golf fitness niche business here in north side of Orlando. And there's several trainers here. We have a great group of trainers in Orlando who work with golfers, and most of them are friends of mine. But I'm kind of on the north side of Orlando, up in the Lake Merritt, Heathrow area, and get an opportunity to work with, some of the tour players that live in the area, a lot of the LPGA players that live in the area. And I actually traveled for a few years off and on with a Korean professional golfer, Sunwha Lee, who's a 4-time winner on the tour, Rookie of the Year 2006. So I did get a chance to get out there and do that. And now I'm pretty much home-based with a good studio, a large junior business here in Orlando, and a lot of mini tour, college level, and sprinkled in some PGA Tour players and LPGA players as well.
What did that first conversation or that first connection with Mike look like, and what were maybe some of the other reactions of some of the teaching pros that you approached or maybe approached you? How did that go? Because I know that in those earlier years, a lot of golf pros, and there's still some resistance out there, but there were a lot of golf pros that were resistant to getting their golfers into a program like this.
Yeah, I think, Mike, fortunately with Mike, I'm pretty sure he was on Titleist staff at that time. So he, was getting the inside information. He was getting to sit down with Dave and Greg and learn some things. And Zach would go out there, of course, to Titleist to get fitted, and he was getting screened by them. And so he kind of was ready to jump on board with it once it came around. We actually started doing it about a year before TPI really came around, but he was really got excited about it when all that was coming around. But a lot of the other pros, the average golf pro who worked with kind of the average golfer, I vividly recall I went in and sat down with this guy, and he was a teaching professional, and I had a PowerPoint presentation. I had slides. At that point in time, I pretty much felt like I could just fix anybody. That's that naive young,
exactly.
Young therapist, young trainer. Like I can just, the magic was there, And so I sat down and gave this guy this long PowerPoint presentation and talked to him about how, limitations in the body could be causing problems in the golf swing, and how these things are correlated. The body swings the club. I'm sure I had some really ridiculous quotes in there, but the end of it, he just kind of had this blank stare, and it was really literally like crickets. And it was really awkward. And he's like, wow. He's like, and all this time I just thought, these guys I work with just stunk. He's like, I just thought they kind of sucked. I didn't realize there was any correlation. He's joking, of course, with me, and he never ended up sending me anyone. He's like, he's like, I just thought they sucked at golf. I mean, you're telling me there's some correlation here or some relation? And so we got a good, I later, I actually talked to him about that and told him that story, but it was, kind of fun stuff at the time. But that was the path. I do say, a lot of the guys coming up now, because fitness is so mainstream for golfers, you see it everywhere. And now, if you walk over to a golfer and you're like, hey, yeah, I do, I work with golfers. I'm a strength trainer, or I'm a yoga instructor. I work with golfers, and they're like, oh yeah, I love that. I do that already, or it's so commonplace. Back then, I mean, they'd look at you like you're crazy. Like, what do you mean you work with golfers? Like, you have a business? Like, how do you feed your family?
Yeah, I've actually had people ask me like, wait, that's a real thing? Like, that's a real job? Like, yeah. Actually, there's quite a few golfers that actually work out now. It's a thing.
Yep, it's a thing. It's for real, and it's here, pretty much hopefully here to stay. So, like you said, still some resistance out there, but I think on the whole, it's headed in the right direction. It's an exciting time to be involved in golf. As far as from the training side, the technology side, it's a very exciting time. I'll tell you a real quick story about that. That's funny. I work with a PGA Tour player that was in last week. He's playing in Bay Hill now, and he came in. I was training these two mini tour guys, and I've got this one mini tour guy. He's about, I don't know, he's like 6'3". I mean, if you met him on the street, you'd think he was probably a hockey player, right? And he's just pretty built, kind of that, Brooks Koepka type look, type of a guy. And I got another guy who's, a little bit shorter, but actually grew up playing hockey, super fast. And we're doing like these, twisting box jumps onto like a 30-inch box, and he's making it look like he's like, just like hopping over a little, aerobic step or something. And my tour player guy comes in after they leave, and he's like, what the heck was that? And he's like, he's in his mid-30s, and, he just has just started training a little bit, but he's like, these guys, he's like, there's no way I can compete with these guys, like on the level of athleticism and on the level of, fitness and how far they hit the ball and all that stuff. And I thought it was funny, but in a way I kind of looked at him and I go, yeah, but like you're on the PGA Tour, dude. I'm like, they're trying to get where you are. They're saying the same thing about you, in some ways. So it's an interesting story, but it does highlight how, golf is changing. We've got a lot more athletes coming into the game. At the same time, there are different ways for guys to get to the top level. And that's something I know you've talked about that, I know. So that'll fit in a little bit into what I'm going to talk to you about when we talk about, the appropriate times to be golfish,
Yeah, I think that's a great story because it kind of does. It highlights the fact that the game is changing no matter who's talking about it or whatever. When you look at these guys coming up, you look at a guy like a Tony Finau or even Dustin Johnson, and I would say Dustin Johnson's on the older end of the spectrum now, but you're looking at these younger guys and first how far they hit it. I mean, you look at some of the high school kids that come into your clinic and how far these kids are hitting the ball and what they can do physically. Now, some of them come in and they can't do much physically, but the way that they're becoming athletes or the higher level athletes are starting to kind of gravitate towards this game as well. It really is changing. And you hear some of the older guys talking about, oh man, those younger guys, when they come up to the show, it's going to be hard to compete with the distance that they have. But again, there's different things. There's putting, the chipping, the short game, all that stuff that really levels out the playing field. But that level of athleticism is definitely a piece of the pie that's becoming, I would say, much, much bigger. Well, let's jump in and start talking about some of the training stuff, because obviously you've seen a lot of difference going from the Health South days where it sounds like it was much more of just a rehab style process to now more of a sports performance process. And give us a little glimpse of that transformation, and then we'll kind of get into a bit of the programming side of things.
I've had to learn a lot, because I know you're a physical therapist. I'm a physical therapist. That's my background. Immediately wanting to work with athletes, I went out and obtained, my CSCS. So I did get out there and learn, as much as I could about the fundamentals of strength training and weight training and lifting and resistance training. And I really kind of enjoy that so much. I think what you see now is you've got this spectrum of athletic ability, and you have some guys who can really do high level training, like really training like athletes, and they're comfortable with that, and that's what they really seek out. They want to do, power lifts, and they want to do, heavier weights and training, and they're just much more comfortable with it. They've come up doing it a bit more. They're very in tune with their bodies. They have a lot more knowledge of that. They have a lot more knowledge of how to do self-mobility. I know you talk about that a lot on the show with, tools that you use with self-mobilization tools. Most of these guys come in and they've already got that stuff. They're already doing it. Back when we first started, like you had to introduce everything to these guys. It was like they've never worked out before. And now we're getting this group of guys that come in with a really good base of knowledge for working out. And it fits in a little bit to some of the things I'm going to talk about here, which is that in our training programming, depending on who you're working with, they have a high level of knowledge with some of their lifting. And a lot of the guys are coming to us seeking out more than just lifting. Like they know how to lift, like they do lift. Maybe they need help more so, not necessarily teaching them how to lift as much, but more like teaching them how to program their lifts and how to periodize their schedule when they have seasons and, these little cycles where they're off. And so a lot of it gets into some of that fine tuning. A lot of my mini tour guys, who maybe don't have the money to come in and pay for a trainer every time, they want to program and then they want to follow up with you. And, the relationship has changed. There's not so much spoon feeding going on.
Yeah. I would say that I've seen exactly that trend. The whole idea of the spoon feeding of here's your program, let me walk it through you. For the higher level golfer, a lot of these guys, first of all, they don't have the flexibility in their schedule, especially depending on where they are, PGA, web.com, or on a different scale than that. They want guidance. They've lifted, they're athletic, but they need something to specifically help them with what their goal is, which typically is golf. How do I work that around my schedule, whether that be their work schedule, their school schedule, their travel schedule? And you're right, a lot of them are so much more informed when they come in. And when I have a younger guy come in and he's never been on a foam roller, it's shocking now, as opposed to before. You just kind of assumed you had to show these people everything.
Yeah, I can't tell you that, most of the time people are coming in and they already know how to use these tools. And what we end up doing is, tweaking it. I end up saying, I like that. I like what you're doing there. And now, why don't you spend a little time on this area? Why don't you work on this area? And I think that comes down to probably the first thing you should talk about, which is really just like, when somebody comes in and you screen them. So when you screen an athlete, which I think most good trainers are doing some form of screening, and they're utilizing that screen to help them make choices. And I think when we first started doing the screening, I recall with TPI, it used to be very focused on a lot of it compared back to like what the PGA Tour player could do, and I liked that. I think that was good marketing in a way. It was like, oh, well, this guy can, the average torso rotation is this and this. And I think that's good. And you can kind of see what's going on in there. But a lot of really what I do with the screen is just, it's a baseline information for me. I need to know where somebody's starting. And if you're going to write a program for somebody, you got to know where they're starting. Okay. No matter where they're starting. So when you do some form of screen and you look at movements or you look at power testing or speed testing or strength testing, you have a baseline idea of where is this person. That's going to help you develop a list of strengths and weaknesses and priorities, because ultimately training comes down to priorities. And that's where, we get into, or I get into, kind of that talk of, on the golfish side, which I don't know, maybe I was thinking you could explain golfish, because I know you've talked about it a lot. But maybe you might even know where that term came from better than me. And then I can lead into what, how I use that or the ways I use that.
Yeah, as far as I understand, Charlie Weingroff is the one that kind of coined the phrase. And my first introduction was at the World Golf Fitness Summit 2014. And it very well may have been something that he said earlier than that. but he gave a presentation talking about just, preparation and how to work with golfers or athletes or just, general population folk. And that, there has been kind of a swing, and I think it's gone back and forth. And, as far as strength training, first of all, just the idea of strength training at all in golf. And then, swinging the pendulum towards, doing things that looked very golfy in a program. Yeah. And I think that's, and I've experienced this, you've experienced this, everybody that is a golf fitness professional has experienced this. Somebody comes in and they say, I want to work on my golf game, and they're expecting just exercises that look like a golf swing, and it's a rotation-based exercise, and that's pretty much all they're looking for. And so then,
exactly.
Now you've got the different bands and all these different products that then swung in that direction. Like, oh, okay, here's a market of, well, golf's already the gadgetiest market that you can think of, and now the fitness side
for sure.
is also very gadgety. So I think the combination of those swung the pendulum to where things became very much, let's make your exercise look like a golf swing, and that's where the term golfish, I think, kind of came from. And then you get people on the other side of the fence that are saying, training the human body is the human body. You have to train it according to scientific principles of strength and conditioning, and there's only one way to do it. So there's definitely this huge spectrum, and some people fall more towards the golfish side, some people fall more towards the traditional strength training side, and like everything, as everybody that listens to the show knows, I fall much more in the middle of, there's a gray area there. But I know that, you've had discussions with people, I've had discussions with people on when is there a time to use some of this quote unquote golfish stuff. And is it appropriate or is it just marketing?
Yeah. So the answer to that last question is yes to both, because it is ultimately, obviously, there's a marketing component to some of that stuff for sure. The golfers want to come in, they do want to feel like they're doing something that is different, something that is specific to their sport. So when you give them that, there is marketing. You can create buy-in with your clients. I think speaking the terminology is super important. It gives you buy-in for sure. But I also think, it's got to be effective. Whatever you're doing has to be effective. And what's the choice? Why are you choosing to do this? Why not just, I think like you said, there's a spectrum on the strength side. And there's a group of guys out there who would just say, look, training is training. Like, what are the physical requirements of the sport? Okay, let's train those things. Let's squat, let's push, let's pull, let's do something metabolic, let's do something power, let's do something speed, and then let that person go over to the range and hit balls with their coach. And where I fall is on the other end of the spectrum, but that's me, and I'm not saying everyone should. But in working with Mike, and if anybody who knows anything about Mike, he's one of the smartest guys out there as far as the golf swing. And he's got a proven track record of developing a person's swing for high efficiency. So it's an efficient movement. He looks at the science behind the golf swing. What are the positions, the sequencing, the movement, the placements? How do things need to work to piece together to allow somebody to have an efficient swing? So when you think of all that stuff, you think, well, that's like kind of high intensity skill level. That's high skill level. So that seems to be on the other end of the spectrum from more like generic fitness training. And so a lot of these positions and movements that the clients need to come in to get into, these are not natural positions to some extent. Let's not say that the golf swing is really natural. Let's face it. You hinge forward, you hinge laterally, you rotate, this isn't really necessarily a natural movement. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why people struggle with it, is because it's not a natural movement to some people. And you have to develop it via skilled training. You have to, so to speak, time under tension. And so I fall in, and when I talk about screening people, I look at that spectrum. And that's my favorite way to look at it, is you have this spectrum, let's say on the left, general fitness. I also don't like the term golf fitness. I think it is also a marketing term, but it's easily digestible. And people understand that means, oh, you work with golfers and you do some sort of fitness. They don't really know what that means. I think there's broken down in that category. I think you have more like, there's strength training that can be specific to golf. I think there's mobility training. I think there's movement training. I think there's speed, power training. They're all fit underneath that umbrella. And, the term itself I don't love, but I use it because, again, it lets people know this is what you do. And on one end, you have this generic, isolated general type of training that goes on. And that is absolutely necessary. Absolutely. Because if you have no athletic base and you don't have a base of strength, you can't really build upon that. And so I totally say, let's go for that. Let's get that. We're going to cross that off the list for sure. On the other end, you have this kind of more specific integrated type of training that, says, well, what if I do work on the isolation? Let's say I got somebody in, let's be specific. So I've got a guy and he's got shoulder external rotation limitation. And so we go in and we say, let's stretch that. And we stretch out the pec and we, have them do these external rotation stretches, and we increase the strength of the scapular stabilizers to help improve the position. And we do all that general isolated type of fitness training that I wouldn't really call that golf fitness training because it's really just working on their body.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with golf, but it could. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum and Scott says, okay, we've been working on that. Now what I want to do is I want to take, and I'm going to give you this golf grip, and I'm going to attach one of these little rubber bands on it, this golfish equipment. And I'm going to have you take your right arm, and I'm going to have you take that right arm and kind of drive it down towards impact. You're going to keep your elbow inside your hand, and you're going to work on maintaining your external rotation under like this little bit of load. And you're going to practice that movement a little bit after you've done all this mobility, activation, warm-up, general isolated stuff. But then you're going to try to form a level of integration. And I'm kind of on that end of the spectrum saying, what in the world would be wrong with that? It's not that you're saying that you would go into a session with a trainer and only do that. I think that would be, ridiculous. And I'd be glad to make fun of that just as much as anybody else. But the label that's been put on some of this stuff is a kind of a derogatory label. It's like, you're like the golfish guy, and I actually think it's really funny, and I kind of enjoy being the golfish guy. But the label that gets put out there is one thing, but the reality of it is that, the training could be useful. It could be effective. We shouldn't necessarily be closed-minded to these ideas and concepts as a way of, elevating our ideas over them. I think I've probably made that mistake professionally where, I've got a great idea about something and let me diminish something else in someone. But that's not even really necessary because the general training has to happen. But the isolated specific golfish training, which is on the other end of the spectrum, can certainly happen and help.
Well, and I think it's funny because sometimes the training world, the nutrition world and golf instruction world can end up being so dogmatic that somebody takes a position and they only stick to that position. But also one of the issues, and I think that most of the trainers would agree with this, that the problem is many times the golfer themselves, they only get the small glimpse. So they may only see that golfish exercise and they're like, oh, I got to try that in my routine when I go into the gym next time. And they don't understand that there was a lot done prior to what that drill is that Scott's doing on his Instagram feed. So it's not that, we just go to Scott's and we just rotate with a bunch of rubber bands and we throw medicine balls. It's that's a piece that we're using to integrate certain other things. And so I think it's important for those listening that just because you see a cool picture on Instagram, and I think Chris Finn and I talked about this too, the stuff that we put on Instagram is often some of the stuff that's a little more unique and cool looking because it draws eyeballs. And that's just, again, the nature of the game. That's the marketing part of it.
Sure.
And I mean, shoot, I'm a guy that has a golf fitness podcast. So, and I hate the term golf fitness. But it's kind of a necessary evil of the social media world and everything. But understanding that the background of what's going on with an athlete is not just those 3 exercises that you saw on Golf Digest, and that can't make up your full program. And I think that's where a lot of this gets mixed up and mashed up, and the golfers get the wrong idea of what they actually should be doing in combination with other things.
I agree. And that's part of the educational process as a trainer is to get somebody to come in and say, you can't achieve these certain positions. So like if can I do that exercise? I'm like, well, you could do that exercise, but it wouldn't be really super effective unless you did the pre-work. And that's what I love about actually doing those exercises in the gym. So for people who kind of, to some extent, knock doing those things, I would also say to them, hey, like the gym is actually one of the few times when a lot of these golfers that we work with, and I'm not talking about tour players. So I'll talk about that in a second because there's a huge difference, and I'll tell you one of the general ways I look at training a tour player versus training the average off the street golfer. They do need to understand that pre-work comes in. You have to show them that. You got to tell them, you got to go, look, you saw this exercise. Yeah, it looks like that would help your golf game. Yeah, I mean, it could help your golf game, but not optimally because you really don't have all the precursor movements that you need. So let's do this. Let's work on all this. Let's mobilize. So what I love about doing it in the gym is you actually have that person warm up. How many golfers just go out and beat balls? They never really truly warm up. But when you come in the gym, you can do some metabolic stuff. You can warm them up. You can, get them on the foam roller, or you do some sort of mobility series with like a dowel rod or a stretching pole. And now you have this person they're actually at that moment moving way better than they ever moved in their golf lesson.
Yeah, very
and
true.
now you've grasped this opportunity to say, I got this person really warmed up. Now, remember that drill your swing instructor was doing? And let's do that again. Let's do that now, and I want to see how it feels. And I'm going to add a little load, or I might do something isometric with you, or I might create a stability component to it by changing your feed, or I'm going to do something different to it. But let me put you in that position and challenge you once you've actually warmed up like the way a normal athlete would train. And, I go back and we talked about this, like my son is an 11-year-old. My kids are all gymnasts. I have 4 kids, but actually my little guy Ty is going to be my sole golfer, I hope. But my 11-year-old son is really passionate about gymnastics. He's a USA national team member for junior development. And if you go on my Instas, you'll see his videos, which are way more impressive than anything that I ever post on myself or my golfers.
They are amazing. I was flipping through earlier, and you guys have to go check out Scott's Instagram feed and look at his son's videos. It's like Olympic level gymnastics. Watching this 11-year-old is crazy.
Yeah, and so I love gymnastics, and one of the things that we look at in gymnastics is my son, they do a 4-hour practice, right? So when he goes into practice, the first hour and a half is conditioning and prep, warm-up, mobility. So they spend an hour and a half prepping their body for the skill training that is about to come. And I love that. And part of their skill training, or part of their strength training warm-up, by the way, is apparatus training. So I guess you might call that gymnastic-ish or something. I'm not sure, but if you're training on the apparatus,
you're coining it.
Yeah, I coined it. It's terrible, but if you're training on the apparatus that you're then going to be using as a part of your sport, I guess we can look at this negatively, but think about a gymnast. Mostly body weight strength, mobility, tons of core stability, a lot of positional holds, time under tension, so to speak, and they develop these muscles in such a way that they're utilized very functionally for the gymnastic skill. But a big part of that is that hour and a half that they spend warming up. I mean, could you imagine a golfer spending an hour and a half before a 3-hour practice segment every time? You could imagine it because you work with high-level players, and so do I. But an average golfer being like, I'm going to hit the gym for an hour and a half, and then we're going to work on those swing drills that my coach gave me. Imagine, I think improvement might kind of go through the roof if you actually prepped your body, but they're not doing that. And that's the part of the sale that you have to give them, is that you need to spend some time doing these things, warming up appropriately. Now go back to your drill you're working on. And by the way, with these golfish drills, I would say, because there are guys out there who say, that golfish stuff is what's really hurting people. And, the strength training is fine. It's not going to hurt you. But the golfish stuff is going to really mess up your golf swing. And I think it's an important caveat to this, if there's trainers listening to this, is to say that I don't come up with my own exercises and just go, oh, let's just throw this in there. Most of those exercises are based on drills from a swing instructor. And I'm either imitating them with different tools to give a little different feel, or, making a balanced component, doing some other things to it in the gym. And you do it right after that mobility activation warm-up, in that time where they're most receptive to being able to move that way. Just like in the same time you would do your power speed training, you wouldn't do that at the end of the workout when you're tired. So you really have to make sure you're doing it at the right spot, but it can fit into your overall program.
That's a great point. It's actually the next question I was going to ask is where you put that in. And I know that prior to us getting on the call, you mentioned the idea of isolated golf fitness stuff versus integrated golf fitness stuff. Can you differentiate that for us a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, we talk about isolated being that spectrum of general stuff. So when you look at the sport of golf, what components do you need for golf? You have to be able to hinge at your hip. You have to be able to laterally flex. You have to have a certain amount of torso rotation, a certain amount of hip rotation. You have to have a certain amount of shoulder rotation. You should have an amount of neck, all these different elements. Like, that's kind of stuff that you would have people doing almost daily as part of their mobility series, their warm-up series, if mobility is a problem for them, by the way. Because one of the things we don't talk about a lot is hypermobility, and that is just as big of a problem as, lack of mobility. So having hypermobility, so when I work with tons of juniors and they come in and they say, we don't really stretch a lot or do a lot of mobility. I'm like, yeah, we don't. Like, your torso rotation is like just ridiculous. Like, you don't need more torso rotation. You actually need to feel where your torso rotation should stop and then sequence and transition back into your swing. So why would we do tons of stretching, So it is isolated is warm-up. That means those body areas, when you've been screened and you know that you have certain tightnesses in your hips and certain tightness in your torso and certain limitations there, or on the flip side, if you're the hypermobile person, the warm-up is oftentimes all the core activations. It's the plank series, the side planks. It's the, some people like crawling, all these other things to engage, scapular stability in a hypermobile athlete. It's a lot of that before you then jump into the power, speed, or integrated golf-specific training. And by integrated, I mean you're adding multiple layers. You're not just stretching your shoulder in external rotation. You're taking your shoulder in external rotation in tilt in the position that you might actually use it in, because it does change a little bit, okay? And so why not train it in that position? And we call it positional mobility. So you'll see some things on my page on Instagram talking about we do positional mobility. That means, what are the key positions of the golf swing? Why don't we try to take our body and stretch into those positions and imitate those positions? Because I will tell you that in 15 years of doing this, the difference between a high-level golfer and an average amateur golfer is the high-level golfer has grooved those movements to the level where it's automatic. The amateur golfer does not move into those positions enough. And it does need to be drastic, but they don't. Like, they might go to the gym and all they ever do are, flexion extension-based exercises. They don't do any rotation. They don't do anything that moves their body laterally to learn how to control lateral movement. So when they do move laterally, they just slide because they don't have a post. So you have to understand that, with respect to these different movements, there is a good sound reason for training into the positions that you move into. And lots of other sports do that. They really do. Like, if you're practicing yoga, you're stretching into those positions. You are learning how to stretch progressively into those positions, and there's ways to do that. You can offload the body. You can assist movement. You can put your hands on them and help them guide the movement. We know a lot of these. I mean, you might call them like RNT or even like DNS, these other different techniques to get people to feel the movement. But if you do that with a golfer and they in the gym have warmed up and now finally feel it, it's like, wow, that's like, you get a lot of aha moments in the gym with people. Oh, now I understand what I was supposed to be doing in my golf swing, because I can feel that right here. I put it under a little load, or I changed the balance. I made him have to stabilize a little, and all of a sudden they can feel it better. And so that really cannot be wrong. It can't be wrong. It's just, it baffles me if you think it's wrong,
No, I like that. I like that term too, positional mobility. And I think a great example of that is kind of eye-opening to every golfer that comes in the door is, just standing there, putting your arm out to the side, bending your elbow to 90 degrees and doing the traditional, rotate your arm backwards the external
Yeah.
external rotation test in a standing position. And then if you bend over into your golf posture and you try to do the exact same thing, it's for most people, it's a lot harder to get in that position. That opens people's eyes like, holy cow, what happened? That's the same motion. And it's just gravity's a little different. Your stabilization's a little different. So I like that idea of positional mobility. I know, Scott, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but you mentioned something about just some difference between training the pros versus training the everyday golfer. I want to see if you could kind of touch on that briefly before we get into the last minute questions.
Sure. So this is a generic philosophy. Obviously, you have to screen every person individually because they all fall in that spectrum, of course, right? So, but for example, if I'm training a professional golfer, this is a high-skilled athlete, right? Meaning for their sport, if they've reached the professional level, they have high skill level, which means that their golf swing is very integrated. It's very much complicated. It's integrated. It's really set up well. But they oftentimes are wrecked physically because high levels of integration in a sport, and you know this, baseball pitchers, and you can see if you took somebody's shirt off, you could tell this guy's, right-handed baseball pitcher. They are going to develop patterns in their body that are sometimes wonderful for the sport, terrible for the body. Mm-hmm. So when I train a golfer, professional golfer, get them in, am I going to do the integrated golf-specific type movements? Not really. No, not really, hardly ever. The only time we ever do anything on that quote-unquote golfish side is an isolated movement. For example, high-level tour players, their problems just get smaller than ours. We have a lot of big problems. They've got smaller ones. I've got two right now that one of them wants to turn more. He wants more torso rotation because if he doesn't turn enough, he gets a little out, a little over it, and has to save it. One of them has shoulder rotation problems for that external rotation, which you gave an example of. So I will give them some isolated golfish drills to work on after the mobility and all that other stuff. But for the most part, you're just actually trying to balance their bodies out. You see these guys now, they have a team of people working on them. They got somebody doing ART. They got somebody doing, different types of massage, chiropractic. Gotten to know Troy Van Biesen really well because of Zach Johnson and Mike Bender. So, I have a lot of respect for these guys, but they're really looking at the holistic approach of like, how do I keep this guy from falling apart, number one? And then number two, maintaining their levels of strength throughout the season. And that's what we do with a lot of our high-level golfers is it's maintain. When they have an off season and a little bit of time, you can progress. But a lot of it is maintenance, okay? And so you don't have to do golf-specific movements with a high-level player because they've already grooved their patterns. A lot of times you need to fix them physically and help them to maintain and stay in the game longer. On the flip side of that, the amateur average golfer who really either has a very poor concept of the swing or very poor body and movement control, those are the ones that I'm going to spend more time doing all that warm-up activation, but then putting them in their positions of their swing, having them throw a medicine ball and develop within the pattern of their swing in certain ways, or having them use bands, having them do these isolations, having them do isometrics and push against me so they can feel their pelvic rotation, all these different things, because they literally don't get the swing. And if you actually want them to stay in the game and be better and continue on, and you can show them that you can improve those areas of the actual golf swing, then you're going to, I think, keep them as a client. I think you're going to actually make differences in improving them. You filter in all your general stuff for sure. You do that. But the beauty of it is you keep them engaged with a lot of that golfish stuff. So if you want to talk about an opportunity to use golfish, it's in that category of people. You will use those activities. But again, you see a tour pro doing it, and then you do kind of scratch your head and you go, well, why would they be doing that? That doesn't make sense.
I was going to say that's a great differentiation, and you hear Greg Rose and Dave Phillips and those guys say a lot with the higher level guys. It's very easy to take a great player and make him good by trying to do too much of that type of stuff. But I think on the flip side, like you said, getting some of these other golfers, their body's more aware of what they need to be doing, where their positions need to be, makes a lot of sense as well. All right, my man, I got to ask the couple quick questions for you before you go. I know we got to get running here, but Caddyshack or Happy Gilmore?
Definitely Caddyshack. Yeah, love Caddyshack.
Awesome. If you had If you had the opportunity to pick a walk-up song, like you're stepping up to the plate in a baseball game, or who was my last guest that mentioned you walk into the cage if you're in an MMA fight,
no.
What would your walk-up song be going to the first tee?
Oh, man. So we talk about this. This is actually hilarious that we do this because I talk about this. I got a couple of girls on the LPGA, and we joke about this, that this, the sport could be better if we had more of that going on.
Yeah,
with walk-off songs and walk-off songs and some of that. You need a little bit of juice into this sport, like at Waste Management, But no, you got to go with, it wouldn't fit my personality at all, if you saw me, because it would be atypical. But you got to go with, LL Cool J, Mama Said Knock You Out.
Nice. Good.
You got to go there.
Yeah, that's a great classic one right there. I love that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
All right, if you had a chance to play 18 holes of golf with anyone in the world, past, present, or future, who would it be, where would you play, and why would you pick that person?
All right, so you got to play Augusta because that's, that place gives you chills when you go there. It's amazing. So you got to play Augusta, which makes this one tough, though, because I'd probably play with my wife, to be honest, because we have 4 kids and we never get a chance to play. And so I'm going to pick my wife. That's an easy one. That's a soft sell. She probably will listen to this eventually.
Bonus points.
And the only problem is I hope we don't mess up the course too much,
Nice.
So,
all right, brother. Do you have one last piece of advice for the audience before we let you go?
Yeah, just, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be golfish. It's not that bad. You can actually use it to help your golfers. But work with your swing coach. Make sure that you're fitting it into what they're trying to achieve and that you collaborate with them. I don't think we have to be isolational. I don't think we have to sit in our strength camp and sit in our fitness camp. I think we can work together. I think that can be a wonderful thing if you do it right. And, just, that's it. Just don't be afraid to try different things or be closed-minded to things.
Awesome. Scott, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I think this episode will give people a little bit of a different mentality around the term golfish. Hopefully it kind of helps them differentiate the idea of just doing things because it looks like a golf swing versus actually using some of these things and the positional mobility, which I love, in the right ways in combination with some of the other things. That it doesn't have to be one or the other. There's definitely gray area, and there's reasons why you might want to use these types of things. So continue doing the great work that you are. I know you've got a bunch of guys and girls on tour that are doing some great things. So keep up the great work, and we will talk to you very soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks for joining us on the 18 Strong podcast this week. You can find all the notes from this show and any information on Scott Shepard and Playing Performance at 18strong.com/Scott-Shepard, or just look up episode number 132, and you'll get all the information there on Scott, all the links we talked about in this episode. Don't forget to check out Rad Roller, the Rad Roller products at radroller.com, and you can use your code 18STRONG to get a discount on some of the greatest soft tissue and myofascial release products out there on the market. And if you want to continue the conversation and ask some questions, even ask Scott some questions directly, we have a private Facebook group called the 18 Strong Movement that you're welcome to come and join us. There's a lot of guests. There's a lot of golfers, fitness professionals, medical professionals, previous guests from the show that are in that group, where we just have conversations going on all the time. So if you want to join us, come on over to the 18 Strong Movement. And lastly, if you have not left a rating or review for the 18 Strong podcast over on iTunes, we would greatly appreciate you doing so, just to let everybody else out there searching for a golf podcast or fitness podcast, let them know what 18 Strong is all about. Once again, thank you for joining me here this week. We will catch up with you with another great guest next week on the show. Train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.
Thanks for listening to the 18 Strong podcast at www.18strong.com. And remember, train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.